Hi. So we've got a couple people in here already. Awesome. Thank you so much, Penny Ortiz and Sandy from Mother Earth Garden Club. Awesome. Thank you for joining me today. Um, I do have a topic I picked out. It's one I'm doing a video on. Can you guys hear me? Because I think maybe I have my thing turned off. Here, let me see. Yeah, that's why. So, all right. So just a second. Got to answer this. All right. Oops. Oh, all right, good. Because my thing was done. Oh, Sumi is here too. Awesome. Thank you. So I'm gonna kind of multitask. Um, Sorry, I got a couple things going on. So, and she's on her lunch, so I have to help with that too. Um, so medieval food storage techniques. I just thought this was super interesting. I took a bunch of notes. A little, you can't see. It's so weird with the light in here right now. Um, so I did not realize how many medieval storage techniques that we were still using today. I didn't realize that castles were, I always thought of castles as being built for defense. Like, um, they're just there and they're protecting the people and everybody can run inside and be safe. And I did not realize how much the castles were built with ventilation for food storage in mind. I didn't realize how much food storage. I kind of have an idea, but I did not know exactly how much food they had to store in a castle to keep people alive just for the winter. Just the winter. We're not looking at a 2-year siege, which a lot of castles had food for sieges and things. So, um, it was just amazing to me. Just a minute. I got to do this. Oh, okay. Um, so their root cellars, the whole castle is designed so that the airflow would cool the castle down in the summer. They could open up the doors and flow air from the cool basement up through, through the castle. I always think of castles as cold, drafty places. And of course, in the winter, they are. And then that food storage down underground, 2 or 3 levels underground. So we're talking basement, sub basement, and subterranean below that, which is really kind of amazing. Yes. um yes, the carrots and big sand crocks. Yes. And they would haul in like sand into these pits that they would create down there for that. And that's just really amazing to me. They had grain silos down in these areas of the castle. When I think of castles and I think of the turrets on a castle, I am not thinking of like a grain silo, but they actually had grain silos, and um, that was kind of amazing to me because I mean I know they bread was a big food item. They had bread every day on their tables there, more than we eat bread now. I mean, and it was the good einkorn and the good nutritious grains. Um, so yeah, I didn't realize that like how much of the castle's architecture was for preserving, of course, the Lord's wine, and they had the wine cellars and stuff like that, but also just to preserve the different areas had different architecture. The potato dungeon, yeah, I I think that we think more of it holding prisoners, but a lot of that area was really designed to hold food. And then when they didn't have prisoners, it was jam packed full of food. The pickling. So pickling started immediately in the spring. As soon as they got greens out there, as soon as they had anything that they could pickle, pickling started. I did not know that the two most highest paid um, workers in the castle was the guy who made the vinegar and the guy who kept the bees. And they did not have a um, food supply. So the number one way that they kept food um, preserved was beekeeping. And we know that this was the highest paid worker that did not live inside the castle. He would live out in the areas with his bees where he kept the bees away from the castle. They didn't work kept inside unless there was a siege going on. And so he was the highest paid man or woman outside of the castle. And it was used to preserve meat and fruits, which is, pretty kind of amazing. And then the next highest paid guy was the guy making the vinegar. We still have a lot of these detailed recipes that they kept um, to make these vinegars, the different flavored vinegars to preserve different foods so that their table had stuff on it year round. And my hair is down today. It's bugging me. Um, it's pretty amazing. So I could not believe that. I wasn't really thinking about that, how that works for them like it does today. I mean, I know I've made peach vinegar, I've made pineapple vinegar, I always make apple cider vinegar. I know I go through 4 gallons of vinegar every summer to preserve just what I and my son use. Um, they would literally submerge it in the honey, just like all the honey ferments that I have on my page. They would actually put the meat, the smoked meat, they would put it in honey and put it in crocks. And when they sent the soldiers out, they would have the honey in the meat because the hydrogen peroxide in the honey would keep the meat fresher even longer, especially when they were traveling and didn't have a way to keep it cool and dry. So they would put it in honey and help keep it from molding. So it was these honey crocks of meat, which I mean, obviously it probably tasted like great. It was a great um, preservative, and we still use it today. And I did not know that they did that with the meat either until I was reading this article. But there's a lot of books that still have all these recipes, and I have seen where they potted meat with the lard of an animal or the tallow from the animal. Potted meats were also put in big crocks and covered, cooked and then covered to keep them fresh longer. And I've done that. It's it's amazing because you'd think it would smell and it doesn't. Sorry, I'm still double tasking here. Um, And then the root cellars kept the food about 55 degrees year round. So, yeah, unless you're a beekeeper, honey nowadays is way too expensive to submerge meat. But, um, yeah, but they didn't let that honey go to waste. They also ate that honey or they made it into meat or other things. So the honey got recycled. It wasn't like they had to throw the honey out. Like I think today we'd probably just throw the honey out. Back then it got used. It got put into bread. It got used as a sweetener. It still got used. It was not gone to waste. Um, but yeah, we don't check on bees. You're gonna be potting meat and honey. Um, yeah. All right. Back to I have a list of what I want to cover today. So I didn't have to come up here and not have a topic and what am I going to talk about? Root cellars, 55 degrees Fahrenheit year round. That's pretty amazing that they could get the temperature control like that. That we sometimes a lot of our root cellars here we still struggle to keep our temperature controlled. And they had their architects dedicated to making sure that they could preserve food or they wouldn't survive. I don't personally make alcohol products intentionally. Of course, in order to make vinegar, you do make hard cider to start. So there are some, I do use a lot of alcohol to preserve stuff. I have thought about making mead because of having the honeybees. It'd be interesting. I know how to make it. I have tasted it, but I have not made it personally myself just because I love my honey and I'd never get enough for all the other things I'm making with it. So, um, yeah. So then pickling. Pickling is another huge way, like way more than what we do now, that they preserved. And they started pickling everything right away. So as soon as things started coming out that they could harvest, they started pickling it. 40% of all the vegetables they grew for the castle went into pickling. So they were eating 60% fresh and 40% were pickled. So all the cabbages, um, everything, pickled eggs. Eggs were another, they preserved eggs by pickling them. So that was another big or vessels in these castles just to pickle eggs. That's a lot of eggs. That's a lot of eggs to get through the winter. Um, the really important thing to remember about doing these pickled ferments or like sauerkraut and stuff, they're all high in vitamin C, which is something that the people were going to be deficient in um, over the winter. And so these pickles and these ferments really helped keep up the health of the people in these castles. So, Gil, if you want to come up, or if anybody else wants to come up, I did drop the link there, so you can come up if you want. So pickling wasn't just a way to preserve food; it was also a way to stay healthy in the winter. And so in the spring, when they had a surplus of eggs and things, they would pickle them, and then they would have them in the winter. Salt, and I know we talked about salt merchants coming through these places. But we always think of castles defense being on these big ocean fronts, and they had these defending castles against the Viking hoarders coming in on the oceans. But actually, a lot of the reason why the castle was on the ocean front is because that's where you could gather salt. So they would have someone down there boiling these big vats of water in order to make their own salt that they could use to preserve. And they would use up to 5,000 pounds of salt per castle a year. That's a lot of salt. And I mean, I'm sure that there were merchants coming with these specialty salts, the pink salt and the black salt and these different salts from different beaches and different areas. But the castles were definitely making their own salt, and they were definitely had somebody out there on the oceans or in areas like here there's a salt mine somewhere where they could mine salt and bring it back to their castles. And so that was something I never really thought about, is how all of the transport things and that part of why their castles were placed where they were was easy access to these minerals that they needed to preserve food. They had gardens of herbs grown just for pickling. Yes, yes, I have done that. Egg yolks, yes, I have done that, where you salt them and you get all the moisture out of them. They're very interesting tasting. They're different. It's interesting. Not something I'm going to do a lot of unless I have a lot of eggs. Yay. But yes, you can salt yolks and preserve yolks in salt. So. Hi, Gil.
Hey,
Welcome.
one of the things
Can you hear me? Or am
I can
I?
hear you.
There.
One of the things I heard or remember from history and stuff was
Okay.
during the Middle Ages, during um, the spice trade routes and stuff and everything going on, the biggest thing imported into Europe was pepper
Mm-hmm.
for preserving foods and camouflaging the taste of ones that were starting to go bad.
Yeah, that's the whole point of pepper.
Yeah.
I'm going to try something different. My internet seems to be going a little. I'm going to try something here.
Yeah, on the YouTube side, you're moving okay. Here on StreamYard, you're kind of every now and then go a little roboto, but it's running smooth on YouTube, as far as I can see.
Okay. All right. Because I keep going in and out on my side, so I wasn't sure. I can hear better now that you're here. I guess I needed another audio to bounce off of. Um, we talked about the grain silos, smoked meat and fish. Smoked meat and fish. Up to 200 pounds of meat per day was smoked in order enough meat for winter. And they estimated that a castle that housed 150 people would need 18,000 pounds of meat for winter. They were definitely carnivores back then. They were
Oh
eating
yeah,
a lot more meat than vegetables. Yeah.
yeah. I guess
And
that's
then
why there
the
weren't very many vegans
things
back
that
then.
kind of amazed me is the same as now. Applewood was for the Lord's feast. Alderwood is prime personal. I didn't hear you.
I said I guess that's why I didn't have vegans back then.
Oh, I lost and Gil froze.
Uh,
Let me hang on just a second. I'm gonna switch my internet to something else. I'm gonna switch a different carrier here.
okay. Well, I'll stay here until she disappears so we can keep it going. Yeah, the spice trade had a big impact on medieval European life. When the spices were coming in, they were able to do a lot more stuff. But smoking meat and making jerkies and stuff goes back thousands of years. I'm just trying to remember which one it was. It may have been back in the Bible, if I'm remembering right. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, there I'm back.
Two brothers, Jacob's kids. One was a hunter, one was agricultural guy, and they talked about the meat preservation and how the meat was done back then. Mentioned as sort of like a side story. It was side facts they added to the story back then. So a lot of that stuff was still going on because hey, that's what worked, and nobody changed it.
And the smokehouses would be outside of the castle, so they didn't set the whole place ablaze. And they would run 24 hours a day in the fall.
I'm surprised they weren't running more, not just in the fall, but other times too.
Well, yeah, I'm sure other times they were preserving it, but they in the fall they would be a day shift and like we have the day shift, the afternoon shift, and the night shift. They would have men assigned around the clock to keep that meat smoking, make sure it didn't burn, to make sure that everything they harvested got of the quality that they could keep it. So it must be something with the internet out here tonight because my phone's not doing much better either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think veggies were a lot harder to preserve. They didn't have the temperature control that we do. Although I was amazed at how much the architecture really played into keeping different areas of the castle, the cheese cellar and the wine cellar and the fruits and the vegetables all had their own little, and somebody in charge of each one of those rooms to keep it moist or dry or whatever they needed to do to keep it preserved.
Yeah. The interesting thing about medieval times, it was not so.
And then they also had like
I think we had a big lag between.
You went out on my end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The big thing about medieval times, people don't realize how much knowledge they still had and possessed during medieval times. Everyone refers to, so Dark Ages. No, that's just certain. Dark Ages was mainly because of the weather and everything else. But people apply that to knowledge. I mean, there was still a lot of knowledge going on, interchange of information stuff during the Dark Ages. But because one of the interesting facts is, I'm trying to remember the years here off the top of my head. It was known as the Big Chill, the Little Ice Age. Prior to that, there was a lot of commerce, and it was tracked between England and France and Germany and Switzerland and Belgium and Norway and Spain and everything. There was a lot of commerce going on. And so they were tracking stuff, and there were tariffs and import fees and everything else going on back then. So there was a lot of commerce going on. So they had all their paprikas, the peppers, the other incense spices and stuff like that coming in. from the Far East and stuff, and with not just the spices came knowledge of how to use the spices, and a lot of dishes that are recognized as, oh, these are European dishes, have their roots back in China and India. So there was a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Um, Speaking of like China, they had some massive inventory schedules on these castles with standardized scoops and food rotation practices that we should be envious of today. I mean, they had somebody there, scribe, keeping records and making sure that the oldest food was being used first, and that the kitchen was, being thrifty with what they had. And it was just amazing. So, the people who were just dedicated to keeping the people alive by preserving food in the castle. There was, a whole set of staff that was just dedicated to preserving the food. And they would make sure that nothing went to waste because they couldn't afford it. And they didn't have the weather tech like we, it was canceled because of the predicted rain already today. They didn't have any of that. Any kind of weather prediction instruments like we have, to plant their crops or to get things laid out to dry. We haven't even covered how they dry a lot of food.
Yeah.
And
But they did keep historical
I've
records.
got somebody coming to the door.
Yeah.
Yes, and there so many of those are available. It was kind of amazing when I took a deep dive. I think it's just an Amazon delivery. Yes, they would use dogs and cats to kill rats.
Yeah. My daughter's
Amazon package.
Australian.
I wondered they didn't know where they were going.
Yeah, my daughter's Australian Shepherd would hunt the voles and field mice froze more than the cats would.
Yeah. Yeah. Our cat's not very good at it. He'll point one out, like stare at it, but he's not very good at catching it. But he's not very hungry either. Records show that they lost about 20% of their crop to food spoilage. So that's pretty cool that they even tracked how much spoilage they had, that we can look back and go, 20%. Another thing they did to protect against animals was sealed clay pots. So they also had somebody out there making pottery, which that went back to China again, to earlier civilization.
Yeah. In Egypt and Middle East.
Egypt. Well, honey, they were preserving things in honey. We talked about that. Yeah. Ancient Egypt, they did a lot of preserving, not just food and honey. We'd have a lot more mummies if the raiders hadn't stole the honey.
I'm surprised that maybe I just missed it, but I'm surprised they weren't making mead and stuff like that in Egypt. All the honey and the milk from the goats and cows and stuff.
They were,
or if they were,
on
it was
wine
reserved
people.
for the pharaoh.
Well, yeah, that could be it too. They could have, only certain castes of people got certain foods.
Yeah.
That's been going on for generations. But it's just interesting. I had no idea all the thought that went into building a castle in order to preserve food. No
Yeah.
idea. I really thought they were just buildings for defense and really not much thought. I didn't feel like they put much thought into the comfort of the people living there at all. And if you've ever been in one, they're not that comfortable unless they've been renovated.
Yeah. From my understanding on castles and stuff, there was it was first, the center fortress was first to get through fights and stuff, and then they built an outer wall and to give more space, and then they built a farther out outer wall. So it's concentric rings. As the longer it was there, the wider the walls got built, and each ring out farther had more people in it doing other things, and some of the farthest out rings had more gardens and stuff and everything else like that in there. Where in the the very center was the primary king's residence or duke's residence, and there was the military center point.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they had to withhold sieges. I mean, some of those sieges went on for years. It's just amazing how long they could hold out in there. But again, they had their gardens, they had their animals, they would come in, and so they had workers. I didn't think about Egypt having gardens year round where castles are mostly, and where they have a severe winter. So that's a good point.
But then also, if you look at medieval Europe, when we think of castles, we're thinking northern Germany, England, where England is really cold. But southern Spain, with their castles, they're on the Mediterranean. Italy, Italy has the mountains, but they got a lot of Mediterranean weather there, and so there's probably Europe covers a vast spectrum of climate, so they can do different things in different parts. Of course, then Switzerland is all the big castles in the mountains and stuff. It's almost like here where we have we got 4 months, 5 months of growing season, and then fall sets in, and the cold and the snow, and then the spring doesn't come for us. Really doesn't start until sometime in May. So it's it's one of those things of adapting to whatever environment they're in, but every environment was different.
Yeah, Sandy, lutefisk is still very popular in like the Minnesota area where a lot of Scandinavian people settled. So lutefisk is still out there. It's still being made in Scandinavia and here. Yeah, and all these ways. I mean, people think they have to have fancy equipment. They think they have to have refrigerators and ice houses and
Freeze dryers,
refrigerated containers or whatever to store large amounts of food. A lot of electricity to store large amount of food, and you really don't. I mean, they were storing 5,000 pounds of salt, which you have to keep dry, 18,000 pounds of meat. I mean, it's just amazing. 40% of all their garden vegetables they were putting away. And I'm amazed that they only had 20% waste, because I'm pretty sure that even as frugal as I am, I would have more waste than that. I mean, I know we'll get back to those potatoes, that 500, 600 pounds of potatoes I was given, and I couldn't even keep all of those put up and kept from spoiling. I still had tons of potatoes in my garage that went bad that year. So,
But you were by
we were
yourself.
eating potatoes 3 meals a day.
But you were canning by yourself.
I was canning by myself. I had my kids, but they weren't helping. They were not, they lost interest after a couple of days. So, and that's a lot of potatoes to peel. And even if you're dehydrating them, which I did a lot, you still have to peel them. And then they had grain. Think about the amount of grain they would have, and I don't have the statistics on that, how much grain they would have to store to give everybody a loaf of bread a day, even though they were tiny loaves.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot of grain.
Well, even here in the United States, the mason jar wasn't invented until 1858, just a couple of years before the start of the Civil War. And so, I mean, all the ways that they had to preserve, they were using the
So
same
most
ways of
food was preserved
here.
in clay crocks that were glazed.
Yeah.
These sealing, just like these sealing crocks and these pickling vessels. It is a herring or a whitefish that is preserved in lye. It's an acquired taste. That's all I'll say on that. It might not be something you want to try without more research. It's the name of the fish that's provide the dish that they serve. Oh, dried cod. Sorry, you can do cod. I think around here they do whitefish, but we have whitefish. We don't have cod in the Great Lakes. So when they came here, they had to adapt it to what they found that was closest to what they had. And cod would be ocean, and inland it would be whitefish. Hey, Bush. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting. And then all the herbs, like they had huge favorite, like you were talking about, they would trade merchants for spices like pepper that they couldn't grow in the climate that was not Mediterranean. Mm-hmm. They would, be trading for lemons. They didn't talk a lot about using lemons or acid to preserve because they didn't have lemons or oranges in medieval Europe. So that would be another way that I was focusing mostly on medieval Europe, but like they used a lot of lemons and lemon juice to preserve. So that's interesting. I have to look into some of these other medieval places. I know that in the deserts they buried clay pots and used those for, but that was just a short-term type of thing. That pickled cabbage and dried apples. A lot of pickled vegetables are really high in vitamin C. So they were using the pickled cabbage, they were using apples, summer, and dried apples, and that was where they were getting their vitamin C from. But scurvy was a real problem. The sailors didn't have the fresh foods, and they would often get scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency problem. So
I just looked up the space trade routes. I was just thinking, what was Europe sending back to Asia? All I brought up here, only was talking about what was coming from Asia to Europe. And they were listing spices: cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, pepper, ginger, cardamom, and saffron. They were the main ones coming from Asia to Europe.
Yep. I mean, look at the price of saffron. Yeah, saffron hasn't lost value. Like if you look at the other spices, I mean, I can buy cardamom now cheap. I can buy cloves cheap. Still can't get saffron cheap. You know, it has not really lost its value like some of the other, spices. Frankincense, myrrh, still very. But anyway, I just wanted to say you don't have to have a lot of expensive equipment to preserve food. You just don't. You can dry it. Oh, rose hips. That's a good point. Thank you, Sandy. Yes, rose hips. Rose hip jelly would be a way that they would have preserved rose hips and had vitamin C. They also would have used rose hips in their tea and had vitamin C. So yeah, those rose gardens that are around those castles had more to do with food than just nutrition. Although they're beautiful, they also helped save those people. That's a good point. Thank you. I didn't even think about that. I actually want to put this on here on my notes. So I do want to do a long form video on this, not just a live, because not everybody checks out the lives. I wish they did, but they don't as well as the short form regular videos. Well, do you have anything else to add? That was kind of interesting, Gil, about the trade.
Yeah, I'm trying to find stuff. I'm looking here at I'm using Wikipedia. I'm looking at the spice trade, and it changed over time. It talks in here about the the third millennium BC. BC, the first millennium AC, and then it goes on into the Spice Islands in Indonesia, and as we talked about the Arab trade in medieval Europe, and then it talks about the New Age of Discovery, new routes and stuff, and Venice becoming the uber power of the spice trade. And that was one of the reasons why Spain backed Columbus in his search for a new route to the Far East. So it wasn't to prove that the Earth was round; it was to prove, hey, there's another route to get to get these spices and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And all the foods they brought back. I'll be right back. I'm gonna go just a minute. I'm gonna shut the TV off. Maybe that'll help with my internet.
Yeah.
I'm still lagging.
I'm just looking here. There's a lot of information about this, and it's just really interesting things that you can find that affect how our ancestors, what I'm looking for here, how they preserve food and stuff, just a couple hundred years ago, and how much that changed from a couple hundred years before that, because during the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, changed the way some foods were, some ways that foods were preserved.
That's better already. It sounds better already. I forgot that was running in there. Now there's nothing else on the internet but us.
Okay, I'm just looking up stuff. So I searched food preservation in Dark Ages, and it changed to in the Middle Ages, salting, drying, smoking, pickling, and canning. But canning really wasn't canning back then, because the canning jar wasn't invented until 1858. So it was more like canning in clay pots, and then sealing the clay pots with the hot after his food was sterilized in it.
Yeah, because Napoleon did can some food, but he didn't have glass jars. He had clay, earthenware jars.
Yeah, and that's why when that's why they find so many broken clay pots, is they were one use only. Because as they were heating it up, they would got all the food hot, and then they put the fresh ring of clay and a plug of clay on there and seal it up so it'd be airtight.
And they were also using like a wax paper or a wax parchment. Mm-hmm. And they used cork to seal them. They weren't necessarily airtight like we do now. Yeah. So that's why they needed so much honey and to preserve jam or a paste. And then they would also dry a lot of to keep it as sealed as possible.
Yeah.
They found there was a ship that went down and it got buried in the mud, and they dug it up and they found that it had waxed cork seals, and those were still sealed. Yeah, rose hips have been traditionally always been used for a tea to help with vitamin C. Yes, I have some rose hips here. I'm gonna make some rose hip stuff with. I ordered. And that's also why it's important. You need to eat fresh vegetables along with your canned goods in the winter. So as much as you can eat fresh, the squashes, the potatoes, the carrots, the onions, that's going to help you stay healthy. And then the pickled foods, and then the canned foods. So
I'm looking at
you through the hungry times.
Looking at the screen here. It's going through listing pickling foods, smoking fish and meats, preserving foods with salt. Then it says confits, CONFITS.
Yes.
And it says, although the term confit
that is where you seal stuff in lard.
Yeah, and it talks about potted meats. In the Middle Ages, the confits are potted meats, which are mostly but not solely made from fowl or pork. Fatty fowl like goose was particularly suitable. To make confit, the meat was salted, cooked for a very long time in its own fat, then allowed to cool in its own fat, then sealed up in its own fat, of course, and stored in a cool place where it could last for months.
Yeah, can you imagine cooking a pork roast? Go ahead.
Okay, it says confits should not be confused with comfits. So you got confits and comfits. The com seeds eaten at the end of the banquet to refresh the breath and aid in digestion.
Yeah, and the CONFIT is preserving food in lard. COMFIT is preserving foods in a sugar, like a sugar-based thing. So
Yeah.
it's very similar, easy to confuse the two words because they're very one consonant away from each other.
Yeah. It doesn't help those two consonants are next to each other in the alphabet.
I love a good pear confit, but yeah, I love a good pear confit, but I'm not making much pork confit in my kitchen. Big difference.
Yeah.
I have done that before with pork chops where I've cooked them thoroughly all the way through and then stored them in their own fat and lard, and then in my refrigerator, and then opened them up to see if they were still good. I'll be honest, I didn't eat them, but I did an experiment to see if I could preserve it that way, and all signs looked really good.
I was thinking the same thing that Sandy just put in there. You know, since they had honey, they had bees. You know, you would definitely be using the beeswax for making candles and everything else.
We're using bees. A lot of the so they were sealing cheeses in beeswax. They were sealing jars with beeswax, just like we did jam with the wax on top. They were using beeswax, and they were also making cloths soaked in beeswax to wrap things to help keep out the moisture. If you were going to travel on making a bread bag, so they would wrap your bread in that, and it breathes a little bit, so it actually keeps bread without preservatives fresh longer than plastic bags you buy at the store with bread, which, as we all know, we're kind of trying to get away from plastics touching our food. The more you learn, the more you don't want plastics near your food. As I sit here using a plastic cup to drink out of. But I'm slowly switching over and getting rid of plastics out of my house. And one step is beeswax wraps for sandwiches and beeswax wraps for bread. Yes, tallow does seal, but again, you have to remember that goes rancid. Where the beeswax won't go rancid, the bees will in it, and so it actually preserves your food longer. So it acts as a preservative. So, and it's easier to clean. You'll never clean a rag that has been soaked in tallow, but you can wipe off a rag that's been soaked in beeswax and keep it clean. A lot of windows in Middle Ages were cloth that had been soaked in tallow to help keep out the moisture runoff, but they could kind of see shadows through it and get some sunlight in, and so they used those a lot for window coverings. Yes, the tallow was making the candles. So, yeah. Beeswax and tallow mix make a better candle.
And so, just to maybe think of something, soap is made from lard. If I remember right, lion lard or something is part of the process for making soap.
Any animal fat.
Okay.
Yep. That's all you need. All you need is lion lard to make soap. And it can be any animal fat. Different fats make a different, like a nice lard makes a really nice soft soap. Tallow makes a very brittle soap. So it was beneficial to mix your fats to get a better soap. I don't have the patience to dip candles. I don't have the patience to do the hand dipped, where you take the wicks and you dip them in a thing of oil and let them dry and then dip them again to make a big candle. I don't have the patience. But anyway, I just really thought it was interesting. I did not realize all the thought and planning, and the architecture of the castle was really designed around preparation and food preservation. I really thought it was mostly designed around protection and defense, and everything else came as a secondary add-on thought. I did not realize that even the way that where they would situate the windows would help ventilate the wine cellar and funnel air and channel air out of the cellars to keep it fresh and not stale and dank and damp. And I had no idea that they were planning that when they were planning the castle. That didn't even occur to me. I did not think they were as smart as what they were. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mom made lye soap. I've made a ton of lye soap. And my mom even taught me how to make the lye. So all you need is a bucket with a hole in it and a lot of wood ash. Once you can float an egg in there, you've got lye you can make soap with. And the way it's almost impossible to buy lye. Used to be you could go into any hardware store, any grocery store, and you could buy lye to clean your drains, and it's the same brand to use to make soap. And I have to order it online now to make soap. Yeah, my mom's lye soap would take any stain out of anything. I had a friend in high school who got grape juice on her white denim jeans, and she was so upset. And she made a comment in front of me, and my mom said, "Bring me the pants." And she brought her pants to my mom, and my mom worked, and she got that, yes, sodium hydroxide. She got that grape juice stain out of those white denim pants. You couldn't tell they weren't brand new, you know. So, and baby spit up. My mom would bought me a bunch of baby clothes that were used, and they had formula spit up on them, and my mom cleaned them, and you couldn't tell they weren't brand new. That lye soap could do miracles. Yeah. Yes, because you put them out on the line and let them sun hang in the sun. Yes, sun bleached too. We forgot a lot of that, a lot of those old ways. So, but we've been on here for an hour now. Does anybody have any other questions or comments or concerns?
Just one quick thing about soap. When do you think lye soap was invented? I'm looking it up here. Ancient Babylon.
I think it's been around just about. I think it's been around since. I would say since people had fire.
Yeah.
Because they'd cook their meat in the fire, and the oil would drip on the wood ashes, and the rain and the wood ashes would turn the.
Yeah. And it says the Babylonians are believed to have accidentally discovered the cleaning properties of lye. Well, ooh, yeah, it's time. I got grandkids are going to start sneaking over here.
Well, when people would grieve, they would cover themselves in sackcloth and ashes, and that's all right. Yeah, accidentally, because they would be cleaning out their fire pits and it would bubble up. So somebody finally discovered what was causing it, but they would often to help keep away bugs as a pest repellent and stuff too. So yeah, they would find that these kinds of things in the fire pit after cooled. So, well, it's been an hour. I'm going to go ahead and log off. Thank you, everybody. Again, Thursday. Or, yeah, Wednesday or Thursday. Yeah, I got another day this week that I'm free. So I'll try another day this week. We'll see if I can come up with a good topic twice in 1 week. So.
All righty.
I will keep you all posted. Thank you so much. You have a great day. Goodbye.